Right, sorry. I don't do the eggshells thing very well.
And I wanted to mention, you mentioned about having read certain things that set you off. Way back, there was an article by Denise Scott Brown, who is the partner of the late Robert Venturi, and she wrote, very well-known architect, both of them. She wrote an article called "Sexism in the Star System in Architecture," and it was published in a book, an anthology called "Architecture: A Place for Women." And I would say that was also another aha moment of mine when I read that article. That really made me mad. And that was one of the first articles. It was a chapter in a book, and it was one of the first chapters that I included in the readings for the course, and I still do. I don't know, those of you who've taken the class, we have a few here if you remember that article, but it was just, or that chapter, I should say, but it just, she basically was describing her own situation in large part, which then resurfaced many years later as she was not given the Pritzker Prize, right?
With her husband, which continues to be a movement right now. There's a petition you can find to say,
you'll see that around.
Is it on here somewhere? Right?
There's Denise's picture in 2013. That picture was taken in 1966, but we put the image here because it became a sort of calling card for the movement to have her recognized. So she wrote this article, just to give you even more context, a couple of years before her husband and business partner, was awarded the Pritzker Prize alone without her for work that they did together. So that was that incredible moment. Even though it went unpublished, she had written it before that happened.
Yeah,
yes. And it still rings true today. But I want to ask one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience because I'm sure there's a lot of interest and questions bubbling up there. I can see it. So I just want to ask, I think, part of the question this exhibition is asking is, now what? Yes, it has a double meaning. It's like, now what? Again, we're dealing with the same issues, but really, earnestly, now what? What is the next step? And where do you see your role in pushing this dialogue forward? We can start with
this. Do I have to go first? That's something interesting. Well, and I'll answer that along with ways you measure. I'm just going to say this is an interesting year for me. This is the third panel I've been asked to be on in the last 4 months. It's all women. It's really cool. So to me, I'm like, what's going on? This is really cool. So, we talked about burnout a little bit. So at a certain point in my life, I'm like, it was probably the end of this chapter. And I'm also a very big advocate for sustainability as well. And we could spend another hour talking about that. But I kind of moved away a little bit from my work on women's issues because I did that whole thing where I'm like, I am an architect. I'm not the accidental historian. I need to focus on my work. But in the past couple of years, I guess, it seems like I'm coming back to this. It seems like two of the three panels, this one included, one of the other ones was on it was called Mentorship, a Lifelong Endeavor, and it was about women mentoring women. So who had mentored me as a woman, and how was I mentoring other women? So that's part of what I feel is important for me to be doing now. And then within my office, I've been trying hard to encourage the young, not just the young women, but the younger people in our firm who, are frustrated that we have, not great, whatever, family leave and those issues, that those all, the men and the women who are at those pinch points where they're trying to juggle the family and the long hours. And so I've been trying to encourage them, because I said, you guys need to lead this. I will support you, but you guys should lead it. And but for some reason I've already named it, not them, but I've been calling it Pathway to Stay. And so I'm sort of focused inward right now on my firm and trying to help us figure out what is the way to help everyone stay and to have that work-life balance that everybody likes to talk about. Another thing that my firm is doing too that I think is also going to help play into all of that is there's something called the JUST label that the International Living Future Institute kind of organizes, and we're planning to submit that this fall. And just that process of looking at your gender gap, you don't intentionally have equity differences, but you have them. And this at least forces you to look at them, and we have to address them now, like that's one thing I'm already seeing coming out of that. I just think that's a really good process. And then that's going to feed into maybe this idea of a pathway to stay. And what does that look like coming from the younger voices, telling what needs to change here to make you guys not leave when there's the pinch point, to stay and get your license, and continue. So
Great.
I suppose it's for me to just remember that we're part of something larger, because it is important to continue to stay engaged. But I personally found that it can be very overwhelming to try to understand every aspect of every issue all the time. And I find myself thinking about the issues that people of color face and how that plays out in Chicago's landscape and has historically. And then I think of how women are affected in different spheres, because women exist in all cultures, in all different spaces. And then when you intersect those two, and what kind of space and mental spaces that creates for people, it becomes a lot. And I think there are things to definitely speak to and be aware of. But I find myself reminding myself very often to refocus and remember that, I think that here in this country, just to get kind of broad for a second, but we're pretty lucky that we're even attempting this level of diversity, because it's not something that a lot of countries do. And I think sometimes it's just to remember how we fit into the bigger picture allows me to actually appreciate the small day-to-day moments of my everyday life. And then that can in turn propel me to continue to do the work that I do and not feel burnt out or overwhelmed by that. And so I really think it's this balance of, you do your everyday things, you remember the movement that you're part of at this time, but then you remember your entire position in a greater existence, which gets a little broad, but you have to continue forward with this kind of thing. And that's the way that I've been able to reason that out to myself and give myself new energy every day to remember how important this stuff is and continue to fight for it.
I want to say, for me, the now what is sort of practice what you preach, hold yourself accountable. I know a lot of times you get super busy, and it's even in the workplace and life, it's hard to just really, just stand up for yourself, say what you believe in, and just really practice it. And that's all I have to say about that.
I think too, we need to continue to keep writing and talking and getting the word out there. I think there's also a role of the media and how important that can be. Okay, for instance, the two of you now in these leadership roles, try to get somebody to write about you. Okay, get it in the Chicago Tribune, get it in the New York Times, get it in the, you're historic figures now. Okay, so or if you don't feel like you are now, you will be in 10 years from now. They'll look back, oh, these were the presidents. So milk the situation that you're in right now and get publicity for it, for what you're doing, recognition for it. Be interviewed, do radio interviews, TV, internet. I mean, whatever reputable sources, obviously. But I think you want to get yourself out there. It's very important. I have found in my own career, I did not seek to see myself as this, but I've become a media spokesperson for gender issues in design and diversity issues in design, and I like that. Actually, I'm very careful before I give interviews. I'm not the type that just picks up the phone and talks, because it doesn't always come out quite right. And these days, you've got to be very careful if it doesn't come out quite right, because that, as we saw last night in the debates, in any kind of public situation, if you make one gaffe, that's what everybody focuses on, and they do not hear what you really intend to say. So I typically, when I do some kind of interview, I ask for the questions in advance. I think about them. I either call the person back and respond by phone, or sometimes even just on email, and I know they're going to get it totally right because it's my words. So I'm careful about those, but I do feel it's important to do that in any way, shape, and form that we can, because I think we want others to know, a much broader audience than just those of us in the design disciplines, how important design is. So I just want to say too, briefly, I, having been focusing so much of my work on the design professions and design education, my most recent book, which is this one that I brought with me, Defined by Design, The Surprising Power of Hidden Gender, Age, and Body Bias in Everyday Products and Places, takes the issues of how we consume design to a much broader audience, and to a public audience, and I had a literary agent. It took me a long time to find an agent to get the book, to find the right publisher. But in contrast to my other books, it's one that's very reasonably priced, and it really went out to a lot of, which I say, it reached a broad audience and got a lot of publicity about how design affects us in ways that we don't always realize. For instance, a couple of us right now, you probably couldn't tell, but we're sitting on booster seats because the chairs are a little low and the tables were a little high. And if we'd been tall men, this probably wouldn't have been an issue for us, right? So, but we're not. Right. So anyway, you can't tell, but Sarah came to the rescue. I'm sitting on some readers right now, a big stack of them, Chicago Reader. Almost sat on my book, but I knew I wanted to show it, so I wanted to get some air here. But anyway, I think those are the issues that we need to think about, how these issues get out to the public too, not just within our own field, because what we do and what you all design affects the everyday person. It's not just people in our field. So keep writing, keep speaking, keep talking, keep getting interviews, and get the word out and about. It's really important.
Great. Well, that's an amazing note to end on. I kind of want to let it linger there and open it up to the audience. I see a lot of faces who have been involved in this discussion in many different ways, and even outside of architecture. If you don't have an architecture background, you might even be able to. Yes.
Yeah, it's actually something on the point we were just thinking. It's a conflict I often have, internally, which is that a lot of the issues that come up don't really have to do with our field. The reason not many women have those in their own, they frequently are in a couple. For example, if healthcare was structured differently, that small firms could provide healthcare, but actually start to not have an issue. Whether the need was more generous, then we could also structure the professional career differently. More minorities would have access to all kinds of different professions, not just architecture, other ones that are not open to them today, if schools were better. And if you were not disadvantaged at the very beginning of your life. So how do you make decisions personally in terms of because we all have limited time and we all have lives, in terms of the type of activism you get involved, whether it needs to be at the larger level, bigger social issues, whether it needs to be something focused on the profession.
I think he's saying that. Is there an issue of hearing in the back of questions? Repeat the question. Yes.
That's a tricky one. How do we, okay, so let me try to repeat some of the question and see if I can get the gist of it. You can correct me. So there are a lot of things, a lot of pinch points in careers and a lot of barriers to equitable access to architecture practice, and a lot of things like maternity leave or access to healthcare that inform decisions by women and minorities, and how they practice or whether they stay in their career. So how do you, we all have busy lives, how do you sort of take those into consideration in your own practices?
More of at which level of activism do you enter? Is it in the profession or is it at a larger societal scale? Some of these issues could be fixed at a much larger scale, and really, shouldn't be fighting about healthcare in our industry.
So at which level of activism do you enter in this discussion societally in the industry?
A good question. If you take like family and medical leave act, it's not, to me, that should be bigger than architecture. So,
do you want to give some background to that?
I'm sorry?
You want to give some background to that?
Oh, so, I'm not an HR person, so I may not get this exactly right, but it's not much. So the law in America, compared to Europe, I guess Europe's just totally different, but it's only firms of a certain size that have to comply with it. So my firm is a larger firm, so we must comply with it. So you think, well, that's good. At least you guys have to comply with the Family and Medical Leave Act. Then when you find out what that act really is, it's not very much. It's I think it's 6 weeks. You're meaning, so if you have a child, men or women, I believe, either one. You can take work off for 6 weeks, and it's so nice because they have to hire you back. There's no pay. It's just your job is safe. That's it. And and that's relatively new. It's been around, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 years for this country. It's that's a problem. And again, not just for architecture, but then I think in architecture, because it's such a kind of, the hours are long and all of that. The problem becomes exacerbated maybe within the field. It becomes even, and I don't know, we're speaking from architecture.
Well,
that's
and
what we know.
90% of architecture firms are ineligible for the Family Medical Leave
Sorry.
Act.
Yes, there's lots of small firms that don't. It doesn't apply to them.
90%
Because they're under
are under 20 people.
under 20.
Mhm.
And I guess one can also say the obvious. After 6 weeks, who knows a 6-week-old who's self-sufficient, right? I don't think they're ready to go out on their own at 6 weeks old. So is that such a great thing to begin with? We need much better than that. And when you look across the globe, there are many countries that give parents, both mothers and fathers, off for a couple years when they have children. So we're really way behind in many family-friendly issues here. in the
Yeah.
United
So I don't know
States.
if that's to answer your question. To me, it's a bigger problem. So it seems like it should be bigger than architecture to try to fix it.
Yes.
But maybe it starts in architecture.
But you're right. I think that like by the attrition rates of women at that point, we sort of lose the critical mass of people who would be agitating for that change that would disproportionately affect our profession. I think that's sort of a bit of what you're saying is that is an issue that's much larger than architecture, but it would affect us so much as a profession.